our time now. The resolution today is the United States federal government should implement the Finnish collaborative model for education. So go over some definitions for the round. What the heck is the Finnish collaborative model for education? Okay, glad you asked. I'll tell you what it is. Essentially what it is it is the model that they use in Finland, clearly. And what it is a system that includes paying teachers very highly, hiring in special educators to assist the teachers, such as social workers and psychologists, really kind of prioritizing teacher autonomy and allowing teacher adaptation. Essentially the mindset and the model that they like to use in Finland is whatever it takes to make the students succeed. Also, this idea of removing largely, and actually entirely standardized tests in favor of non-multiple choice and much shorter tests. And finally, essentially this idea that you're supposed to figure out other ways to do something if it doesn't help the student. And it clearly is also implementing this idea of collaboration among the students and also among the teachers. So that's essentially what the Finnish collaborative system is, the idea of the time frame. So according to the Atlantic Monthly, even though we don't care about citing sources apparently in this round, the Finnish education system took 40 years to integrate this model that they're using. So they took around 40 years to finally and fully integrate it to what it is today. So that's kind of the time frame that we're dealing with, because it is a very long process and we're not going to be kind of implementing it next month in its entirety. However, we will be starting it. So our mandate is essentially to raise teachers' salaries widespread, give teachers far more control in the classrooms, and eliminating standardized tests while prioritizing kind of this idea of collaboration and hiring on special educators. Good. Can I get to the rest of my plain text? Okay. The agent of action is going to be the Department of Education, and for the cost, we're going to give right now $200 billion, and this will be in order to attract the amount of teachers, to attract a high quality kind of pool of teachers, and also to kind of essentially get the wheels rolling on what is going to be a long process of integrating the system into the United States system. The enforcement is going to also be the Department of Education, and as I said, the timeline is essentially beginning immediately, but we are willing to accept that there will be a long time for it to be fully implemented. Question?
So I have a couple about the funding. First off, is the United States federal government giving this to each individual state government for it to distribute within its own public schools, or how is it actually going?
It's essentially given to the Department of Education in order to disperse it to the states and to implement it in the states individually. I'm sorry, seeing this something in my eye. Sorry. Can I keep going? Okay. Question? Just go ahead if it's about clarification.
Okay. Can we ask where the $200 billion exactly is going to be coming from?
It's going to be coming. It's going to be coming out of the budget for the Department of Education. Okay. So the first point is going to be about local autonomy, second point about teaching for understanding, and third about changing competitiveness. So one, local autonomy. So this is extremely important in the Finnish collaborative system. Let's look at the harms we're dealing with today and how the Finnish collaborative system would deal with them. So what we're seeing is a lot of special interests being involved in education. Just look at this idea that teachers are being they have layers and layers of influence trying to teach them how to teach.
All right, let's get this done. Partner ready?
Yeah.
Opponents ready? Judges ready?
No.
Brief off.
Can I have a roadmap?
Yeah. Brief off-time roadmap. I'm going to go over plan, and a couple issues with the funding, then go into off-case and case.
You just start and got my pen.
Okay. So I'll start time now. So if you look at their plan text, they're talking about this is approximately going to cost $200 billion over a time frame of 40 years. And they said that all this money is coming out of the Department of Education's budget. So $200 billion divided by 40 years is about $5 billion a year, which is the entire Department of Education's budget. That means they're not going to be able to do anything else. That means all the special ed help that they give, all the health eds that they give for public education disappears. We see massive detriments to the special education program and special education children. So with that, let's hop in the off case. The first is a solvency press. And this is just talking about how Finland and the United States are intrinsically different. So if we look at Finland, it's a largely homogenous society filled with rich white males. Not only that, but there's free schooling throughout, and there's no such thing as private schools, even to the university level. You don't have to pay a dime for your education. Moreover, they have the best teachers, the people at the top of their classes in private schools. Now the US is completely different than this. And then this is because not only is the US very diverse with a giant economic inequality, we see that their private education is very prevalent. In fact, the best universities are all private. And also, what happens is that the private education, because they pay higher than public education, takes all the best teachers. So the quality of the teachers in the U.S. publication or in the public education system is not as good. And so, if we look towards the United States, we see that as a whole, it is underperforming as compared to other nations. However, if you look to only the rich sections of the United States, they're in fact outperforming the other nations. So we see that the problem is not caused from the education system, but instead is caused by economic inequality. And their Finnish model solves for this in no way. Now our second argument is also somewhat of a solvency press, and it's titled The Social Standing of the Teachers. So right now, in the status quo, the reason the Finnish model works so well is because they're paid so highly and they have such a high standing in society. However, the US education is completely different. In public education, teachers are disrespected. Teachers are not given the social status that they are in Finland. And because of that, they're perceived as inferior. They're perceived as not authority figures in a classroom, and therefore that's why they can't get their education across. Now, no matter how much money you throw into their paychecks, it's not going to change the society's standards. It's not going to change their perceptions. Therefore, their education isn't going to get any better because they're still not going to listen to the teachers. With that, let's hop into a disadvantage, the first disadvantage of a union backlash. So our 8 point here is in the status quo, the Finnish model relies on performance pay, which is essentially the school principals or the big school bigwigs get to decide how much a teacher is paid based on performance. However, if you look towards when this was proposed in the United States, each and every time the backlash from the teachers' unions has been immense. And if they feel out this plan through, then the backlash is gonna have actual real-life ramifications. Now let's talk about what happens when it almost got implemented in Chicago. Almost. This happened last year. 20,000 Chicago teachers were on strikes for a period of 3 weeks. This shut down the entire Chicago education system for 3 weeks. Nothing got done. And if we see this plan go into action, it's not limited to Chicago. We see public walkouts of public educators throughout the nation, and the public education is going to grind to a halt. So even if the system is better, there won't be an institution in place to support it. Teachers will be paid more, but only if they actually attend class, which they won't because of the union backlash. Now our last argument here is of the funding formula. So there's two basic ways to fund schools. The first is through property taxes, and the second is per student. So what happens is that if you look at rich areas, the rich areas with bigger property pay more property taxes, and therefore more funding goes into their education. However, conversely, we see the poor areas, which have minimal property taxes coming in, and therefore they're going to, their school and education system is not as good. And what happens is when we implement this Finnish model, we're going to have to pay teachers immensely more. And because of this, what we're going to see is that the rich people and the rich schools in rich areas are going to be able to pay their teachers. However, the poor schools are only going to get poorer. We're going to see uneven ramifications in poor sectors, and their education is only going to get worse. When the rich people's education is getting better, but they don't need any help. It's the poor people that need help. That's what we're trying to fix, and this Finnish education system is not going to fix it in any way, shape, or form. So with that, let's hop into the on case. So their first contention is that essentially because there's a disarray between state, local, and national standards, education becomes very confusing. However, if you look towards the implementation of the recent Common Core, we're creating a national standard that's not only gels with state and local standards, but exceeds them. And it puts the focus on the exact same things that the Finnish model does. It puts more emphasis on critical thinking, on collaboration. Essentially, they're putting in the Finnish model in education without all the economic and backlash from the teachers' unions. So that takes care of their first contention. Let's go on to their second contention of the teaching for understanding. Once again, if you look towards the Common Core curriculum, the focus is on critical thinking. The focus is on alternative solutions. The focus is basically what the Finnish model focuses on. So we see that the Common Core is essentially a better alternative to anything, or to putting the Finnish model into society. In fact, that's the status quo. That's what we're defending. So the status quo is better than putting the plan in. Now their last argument is of competitiveness and how this leads to suicide and depression and issues in teens essentially. But the thing is, the pressure doesn't come from an education system. The pressure comes from outside sources, things like parents driving their children, things like society telling Asian children that they have to be 4.0 students, that they have to get the A in math, they have to become an engineer. That's where the pressure comes from, not the education system. So fixing the education system or putting in this Finnish model is not going to help the problem of competitiveness whatsoever. It's a cultural thing. It's not going to be fixed by putting in an education system. So because we've proven beyond a doubt that the status quo is much better than any world with the Finnish system in America, you have to vote for negation on this ballot. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do in the speech is first go over case issues, then go over the case itself, and then off case. Is that good? So off case in order of solvency, then DAs.
Okay, perfect. Just like this.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right. Is everyone ready? Peter's awake. All right, let's begin. So the first issue we had with case was this idea of $200 billion distributed over 40 years equals $5 billion a year. Now suddenly they say that, wait, no, actually we're going to be adding $200 billion to the Department of Education over those 40 years, as opposed to what they had said the first time around, which was that we'd be taking these $5 billion out of the education budget. Now judges, this is actually a moving target because they're shifting their advocacy from what it was before. Now, moving target is clearly bad for many reasons, most of which involve that it skews us out of ground. Essentially, we can't predict anymore what they're going to say. It's unfair, it's uneducational for the purposes of this debate, it's abuse. You should vote them down on this alone. And that's clear abuse right there. But more importantly, now they're talking, let's talk about this $200 billion that they're suddenly adding. That's $200 billion of deficit spending, Judge, that they're going to have to do. And they said themselves that they're going to have to cut programs. They don't know what programs, but they're going to have to cut programs. Now, what are the programs that have the most money to be cut? Let's think about Medicare. Let's think about healthcare. Since they don't know what it is, we can assume that, well, why can't it be food stamps? All of these things. In fact, let's assume it's food stamps. Now they're taking food off people's tables. Judge, clearly, because of their own moving target and because they're adding $200 billion to the Department of Education without stipulating where that money is coming from, their plan is clearly insolvent because they have no idea really how it's going to be funded. Now let's talk about the case issues. Their first contention was that this idea of layers of interest. And when my partner brought up Common Core, they responded that it was just the material was extremely difficult. However, Judge, that doesn't address the problem. The problem is not the material itself then, or excuse me, the problem is not the way it's taught, but it's the material. So clearly we can see that at least the Common Core system teaches it in the right way. Even if it's difficult material, people can still achieve mastery over this material. In fact, doing well on Common Core tests would be even more indicative of mastery if it's such a difficult material. So as we can see, this is actually going to set our education system leaps and bounds beyond what they're proposing. Now let's move on to the second contention, which was this idea of standardized tests. Now we explained to you how Common Core is already adapting a brand new system, which is going to involve more emphasis on critical thinking, open-ended questions, which is basically what their PISA test is in the first place. Now they claim that PISA is more for mastery, but if Common Core has more difficult material, obviously doing well on that again is more mastery. And furthermore, they talked about this idea that there's a linear relationship between money and the SATs, but they're trying to fix a problem that's already being solved. In 2016, the SAT is being completely revamped to reduce the emphasis on SAT prep classes and to make it more accessible for lower income people. So as we can see, this problem is already being solved in the status quo, and by trying to fix this problem, essentially, they're not doing it in a way that's beneficial to the American people. Now let's talk about this idea of changing competitiveness. My partner explained to you how there are parents driving their kids, and society tells all these Asian students that they need to succeed. And they came up here and they talked a little bit about how the students are able to focus more on learning, and that a lot of this mindset actually comes from their parents' own education systems. But judges, where did these parents go to school, the ones who pressure their children? They didn't go to the schools in Finland. They didn't go to the brand new schools that they're suggesting are going to be here in America. They went to schools in these Asian countries where there is an emphasis on grades. So when a kid comes home and the parent asks, did you get an A? No, but I collaborated with my peers today. That's simply not going to cut it at home. What they need to show is success. And the fact of the matter is that this new system does not have any mechanism for students to demonstrate success. It's just going to have parents driving them harder to demonstrate it. I have a lot to get through. I'll get to your question at the end if I do have time. Speaking of which, I have 3 minutes 26 seconds left to go over the off case. the first disadvantage that was, the first solvency press that was presented by my partner was that of the largely homogeneous population. And they stated that just because Finland is different doesn't mean we can't adopt the system. But judges, that's exactly what we're saying, or at least that if we adopt the system, it won't work here. Because they didn't address this idea of the giant economic inequality within the United States that is extremely prohibitive for adopting this system, especially when you consider that there are such rich districts and such poor districts that we won't be able to fund this equally across the nation. That's what we're saying, that because of the diverse racial and ethnic makeup of the United States, they won't be able to implement a homogeneous curriculum like they do in Finland. They won't be able to do that. It's just what they do, what their plan does essentially then is it causes more disparity. It exacerbates the issues that we have in society right now. The rich sections of the United States, as my partner stated, already do well, and they didn't address that whatsoever. So as we can see, clearly the issue is economic, and they're not solving for that by changing the education system. Now the second disadvantage was that of social standing, and they came up here and explained that, well, encouraging a higher salary for teachers will result in more skilled teachers. But the fact of the matter is that, first of all, if we're going to have poor schools paying teachers more, that's going to leave them less money to do other things, other essential things such as, special education programs, even the psychologists and special teachers that they were talking about. How are they going to fund that if they're paying their teachers so much? But more importantly, there's some fundamental differences between becoming a teacher in Finland and becoming a teacher in the United States. In Finland, it's an extremely rigorous process. In fact, only 100% of teachers in Finland are from the top 33% of their graduating classes. In the United States, it's a completely different system. It takes 2 years, even 1 year if you're quick about it, to get your teaching credential and or certificate. It isn't as difficult whatsoever. And as a result, people still won't hold people in the same respect. The students still won't, the students and these parents, the helicopter parents in this society, they won't hold these teachers with the same respect that they're granted in the Finnish society. And that's not going to change overnight. That's not even going to change over 40 years because that's an ingrained perception in the United States. Now and throwing more money at the problem furthermore is not going to solve it. And let's talk about the the disadvantage we presented, which was that of union backlash. Now, they stated that, well, we're not actually mandating performance pay, but performance pay is part of the Finnish education system. They said they're implementing the Finnish education system. Judge, they don't get to pick and choose which parts of the Finnish education system they're implementing. If they do so, they're not actually fulfilling the resolution. What they have to do is the entire Finnish education system, and part of that is performance pay, unfortunately. And as a result, we can see that they will have to fiat this through, even if they don't believe that it's part of their own plan, or they're being non-topical about it. But as we can see, we're going to see that unions are going to have a severe backlash. We're going to see teachers who, yes, they might be paid more, but they're going to be out on strike in the streets against this idea of performance pay. So clearly that's not going to benefit any student's education, especially not disadvantaged students who need this education and if they want to break out of the cycle of poverty. Those students aren't being helped by this system where teachers and unions are creating extreme backlash. So as we can see, there's no benefits here. And finally, regarding funding formulas, it's the same idea. The disadvantaged people are just going to get more and more disadvantaged. So for these reasons, we strongly urge a negation ballot on today's resolution.
Considered individually should win us the round, but when they're combined, we should overwhelmingly win the round. So with that, let's move on to our first voter. The first voter is essentially an abuse shell on I talked about special education programs and the massive hit and massive detriments it's going to take if we take away the Department of Education's budget. Now, to fix this problem, in the next speech, they came up and completely changed the plan text, completely changed where they're getting the funding from. Now, all of a sudden, it's deficit spending. Now, what this does is essentially, it's abusive because they changed what they said in the first place in order to fix problems brought us by us. And this is a priority because if they would allow them to do this, then they'll do this further in other rounds. And what happens is that this is essentially debate cheating. And we can't allow this to go on in the spirit of debate. And even though it's the end of the season, we can't allow them to take this to college with them. We can't allow them to bring this cheating attitude to college debate because it's not going to be taken there. So with that, let's move on to our second voter of solvency. Now, it's great that they can put this plan in, but we got to see if they can claim their impacts. There's a couple reasons why it's not going to solve. The first reason went pretty much unrefuted, that the actual solvency or the actual issue comes from the income disparity in the United States. We proved this by looking at the rich nations in the United States, and how they compare to the rich parts of the United States and how they compare to other nations versus the poorer areas of the United States, we see that the rich nations are actually doing better than foreign nations, while the poor nations are leaps and bounds below the rest of the world. Now, not only that, we see that teacher respect. Now, they might get paid more, but there's no link to being paid more and being given more respect. And even if they do get paid more, the respect isn't going to change overnight. The classroom education system and the setting is going to remain the same. The students are still going to disrespect their teachers, and because they're raised on a culture of disrespecting their teachers, it's only going to continue regardless of what the teachers are paid. And their last part of why the solvency doesn't work is the teacher's quality. Now, if you look towards the Finnish education system, there is no private education. Everything is free. However, in the United States, private education is very prominent. We have MIDI, we have Notre Dame, we have a Bellarmine, we have countless private education in high schools. In fact, we have Santa Clara University. You have to pay to get in here. So what happens is that these schools that are privately educated, or these private institutions for education, essentially can afford to pay more to pay the teachers more. And because of that, they swoop all the best teachers and leave the crappy teachers, the bottom of the class teachers, to public education. And that's why the Finnish model wouldn't work regardless, because the quality of the teachers isn't going up. Now, our third voter is union backlash. So we talked about Chicago. We talked about how upon threat of putting in performance pay, 20,000 teachers went on strike for 3 weeks. This shut down Chicago's public education. And this example wasn't even talked about. Instead, they try to claim it as just not, it's not applicable because they didn't specifically state it. But that's part of the Finnish education system. You can't pick and choose, just as my partner says. And if we put this through, the union backlash is going to be immense, as stated in our first speech. Teachers are going to be rioting all over, not only in Chicago, but on a national scale. Public education will grind to a halt. That's going to stop not only America's youth today, but future generations. Because this public education public education is arguably the most important thing in the United States today. And our last argument is of the disparity, and how that putting in this Finnish education system is only going to increase the income disparity and the educational disparity. So as we brought up in the property taxes, we show that the rich schools can afford to pay teachers more. However, the poor schools can't. Their money is going to come out of other stuff. Things like new books, things like infrastructure, things like special education. So if we link all of this back to net benefits, what we see is not only can they not claim any of the impacts because it doesn't solve, but we see a massive disruption in the public education, which hurts everyone in the United States. And not only that, but we see an increase in the disparity, which once again hurts the poor areas unequally than it hurts the rich areas. Sorry, that was very uneloquent. But if we link back to net benefits, we see that there's no benefits to this plan and only harms. So I urge a strong vote for the negation side on this ballot. Thank you.
First and foremost, let's have a big round of applause. Congratulations, everybody, for making it this far. I judged a few rounds today, and this was by far the best. I judged novice though, so. Yeah. So this was a delight. It was good to see you guys. You guys are both very good teams. Looking at Peter's ballot, and looking at mine in school next, it looks like it is a 3-0 decision for the negative. And and so let's kind of go through, and we can keep this short and sweet, but I'd like to give you guys a bit of comments on sort of what happened, because there's a lot that happened yesterday. Peter, I'm actually really excited to hear Peter's RFD.
My RFD, I've got, I'm going for union backlash, moving target on the, where the funding's coming from Blakely is there. And as Constellation Price Gator drawing of Trust Bridge.
Yeah.
So you guys, I think there's